The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to NRCA's webinar as part of OSHA's National Safety Stand-Down. Our presenters today are Tom Shanahan and Rich Truin. I'm going to take a few minutes to introduce our presenters. Tom Shanahan serves as NRCA's Vice President of Enterprise Risk Management and Executive Education. He joined NRCA in 1989. Tom is recognized as an industry health and safety expert and represents NRCA at industry and non-industry events. The U.S. Secretary of Labor appointed him to serve on OSHA's Advisory Committee of Construction Safety and Health from 2007 to 2011. Tom is active in regulatory actions affecting the roofing industry, and he works with officials from the Department of Transportation, OSHA, and NIOSH. Our other presenter is Rich Truin. He's the Director of Enterprise Risk Management at NRCA. He joined NRCA in 2015. Prior to joining NRCA, he was the National Safety Director for Tecta America. He began his career at FGA Christensen Roofing in Milwaukee in 1996. And Rich is an authorized trainer for the OSHA 10 and 30-hour construction safety classes. And he also teaches NRCA's fall protection and CERTA Train the Trainer classes. Before Tom and Rich get started with today's presentation, I'm going to turn it over to OSHA's Director of the Directorate of Construction, Dean McKenzie. Go ahead, Dean.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining NRCA's webinar on fall protection. They'll present a lot of valuable information that will do you a lot of good. You, are joining millions of workers around the world and around the country today in construction sites, military bases, and industrial facilities. The stand down is an important opportunity to take some time out and make sure that fall protection stays a priority for you. It only takes a second to fall. You can spend hours doing a job, but it only takes a second to fall. Nothing is so important that fall protection shouldn't be played out. I look forward to hearing what Tom and Rich have to say today. And with that, I will turn it over to Tom Shanahan. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dean, and thank you and your support, OSHA support of our efforts here. And we're happy to be partnering with OSHA in this very important week and to be dealing with fall protection. I stole this from OSHA's website, Plan, Provide, and Train, and their kind of motto or mantra this week for how falls can be prevented. And I think it's very appropriate for what we will be talking about today. The idea of planning ahead to get the job done safely, providing the right equipment, and training everyone to use the equipment safely. As you know, roofing takes a lot of skill and craftsmanship, and of course, it's inherently dangerous because of where we work. In 2016, there were 991 fatal work injuries in construction industry. 384, 39% of those were from falls. It's the greatest amount, holding a #1 position in terms of fatalities in construction. Also in that same year, for roofing company fatalities, accounted for 115 of the fatalities, or 12%. Yet 92, which is 24% of the construction industry falls, but 80% of the deaths in the roofing industry were from falls. So the idea of impacting fall-related injuries and deaths has a huge impact on the roofing industry. As we continue to emphasize and work in this area, it is incredibly important. Although this seminar won't be about the regulations themselves, we're going to be talking about culture and climate and job assessments. I did want to just have the initial slide of OSHA's duty to have fall protection whenever employees are 6 feet or more above a lower level. And fall protection isn't just about falling off of something. It's also protecting workers from falls, but having objects fall on them and also falling through the surface which they will be working on. And so that has to be examined and deemed structurally safe. So these falls has a different number of different aspects to it. So moving on to our main topic here is the idea of understanding culture and climate and fall prevention. Edgar Schein, in terms of defining, he's the person that's considered expert in culture, and he defines culture as a pattern of shared basic assumptions that the group learned as it solved its problems of external adaptation and internal integration that has worked well enough to be considered valid and therefore to be taught to new members as the correct way to perceive, think, and feel in relation to those problems. That is a mouthful, and I'm going to break it down for you a little bit because it's a really important and interesting definition. So what he's saying first, it's a pattern of shared basic assumptions, this idea that people are sharing assumptions, and assumptions is a key word, that the group learned as it solved its problems of external adaptation and internal integration. So the idea of, as a group, we'll say in the workplace, learns to work together to deal with their internal and external environments, they're making decisions and what they've learned about these problems. And so as they make these assumptions, that they have worked well enough to then to be considered valid. So these assumptions now are valid, keyword assumptions, and therefore are taught to new members as the correct way to perceive, think, and feel in relation to those problems. It's a very powerful dynamic when you consider this as you break it down here. So the idea of culture is something that has really been baked into an organization over a period of time. Because again, the idea that we are teaching people to see something in a certain way, to think about it in a certain way, and to feel in relation to those problems. So it's a very endemic sort of issue. So then the idea of climate comes up. And what is safety climate? Well, climate is defined as the employers and workers' shared views, there's that word shared again, about how safety is valued and reinforced. So a common question is, well, how does safety climate and culture coordinate? You know, what is the difference between these two and how do they interact with each other? And it's a very good question. So here's a way that I like to describe them and the way to think about it. So what message are you sharing? So when you think of yourself as if you're an employer or a supervisor, what are the messages that you are giving to the folks that work for you? So the production safety, for example, fall prevention dilemma. I'd like you to think about this for the production safety dilemma. So the idea is at the moment of calm decision making, what wins? So this is an indicator of a company's climate influence. So in other words, when things are going well and somebody says something like, gosh, you know, how should we approach fall protection in this situation here? Or what does safety look like in this situation here? Well, when everything is calm, the climate, in other words, the way that shared values of the employer and the employees, what everybody assumes and has been taught and talked about is the way people react. So in this particular case, production and safety have kind of a nice balance to them. However, what about at the moment of pressured decision making? What wins in that situation? So this is an indicator of a company culture influence. So in other words, for example, if in a calm moment of decision making, everybody ties off or whatever, but if all of a sudden production is behind and something needs to be done quickly and somebody just says, okay, I'll just run over there and go do that and they're not tied off properly, or I'll just go run over there and get something and they're not checking the deck properly, and something might happen. So the idea of, does production win in that situation, or will safety continue to win? So this is a more endemic situation when under stress and pressure, where does and what is the message that actually gets through? So do they align? And in that alignment, if the answer is yes, then you can assess and say that a positive safety culture exists. Because remember, culture is this more endemic, baked in, over time, reflection of the attitudes and behaviors of an organization, both on the employers and the employees' parts. If they don't, then what we get is a safety culture clash exists. So in other words, you've got the culture, which is this kind of overriding impact, conflicting with the climate, what's being said as how we actually do things. So understanding climate then becomes very key, because climate can actually be seen, measured, and impacted. So it's the thing that is much more understood. Culture is much more a way of being. It's only something that you can see once you can reflect and think about it. Climate is something you can actually look at. So therefore, climate can influence culture, but only when the culture clash is actually recognized. So only when somebody does something to recognize the fact, hey, when we did a job assessment at the end of a job, what we found out was that somebody actually went outside of the warning line when they needed to get something really quickly, and nobody was there to watch them. The safety monitor wasn't present. It's only on that assessment that you start seeing that, hey, what we do in a pinch is not what we're supposed to, not really what we want to be doing, but that's what's being taught. So there's a tool that can help you assess this. NRCA partnered up with CPWR, the Center for Construction Research and Training, and the United Union of Roofers, Waterproofers, and Allied Workers, and we worked on the FCAT survey for small contractors. I'll talk about the FCAT survey for large contractors in just a second, but when that was developed originally, then we decided, that group decided to work on and use the roofing industry to develop the FCAT for small contractors. And here you can see on your screen the website address to get access to this tool, and it's a really terrific tool. What it does, it has a number of questions that address 8 different areas, which I'll talk about in terms of assessing climate. And you can see some of the questions here. You know, have safety policies and procedures, and shares them with all employees. You can say, yes, we do this well, we could do this better, we would need help doing this, we're not able to do this, and I don't know anything about this. And it goes on asking numbers of questions. And then as you rate yourself in these things, there's a number of tools that you can use to help move your company further along to developing a better climate, which could lead to then understanding cultural impact of safety. There's also one for larger contracts, and it's just simply called the FCAT. And here's a link to that as well. And again, this is a more sophisticated tool. It is for larger companies that have that not only have more employees, but that would have possibly full-time safety directors, people who can spend more time at these things. The SC for small contractors was built because oftentimes in small companies, you don't have full-time safety directors, or people, or the roofing contractor, him or herself, is wearing lots of different hats, and that tool can really help in those situations. But there's one for each, and they're really terrific tools to help understand climate. So here are the 8 leading indicators to building commitment to your safety climate that I was referring to earlier. The first one that's asked questions in the thing is demonstrating management commitment to safety. What we know from research and from just practical knowledge is that management commitment to safety is paramount to impacting and affecting culture in such a way that those decisions in a haste are made where the reaction is, we have to be safe, versus we have to do it, regardless of safety. So this is where the FCAT can really help understanding. And again, it's a little bit garbage in, garbage out. You have to be able to answer these things honestly. But that's where the tool is really very helpful, because you can give it to all of your employees as well, submit all of that information, and get a report back that shows you how your employees are answering these questions, and you get a really nice objective survey to see how well what you're thinking is going on actually is going on. So this idea of really appreciating management commitment to safety and impacting that impact of that is what this first indicator is. The second one is promoting and incorporating safety as a value. So this is where you can understand the climate says, hey, we value safety, and this second indicator is all about understanding how well you're doing that or not. But saying you evaluate safety and actually doing it are 2 different things. But this is one of those areas where the climate indicator can really give you a good sense of, is it really happening or not when push comes to shove. The third level is ensuring accountability at all levels. So this is where what we want to do is we want to make sure that safety is pushed down all the way through the organization, that everybody owns safety. It's everybody's responsibility to look out for ourselves and for each other, and the roles of management is to do a number of the following things that we have going on here, but we want to make sure that everybody owns safety, because that's the way that we can all work as a team and get home safely at night. The fourth thing is improves supervisory leadership. Well, this is key, right? I mean, the idea, we all know that the foreman level is the most important level in an organization, because that is the last line of management leadership that impacts behavior of the field staff. And so understanding how to lead versus manage is very key, and the impact of being a leader versus a manager is significant. So this idea of empowering and involving employees is very key. Empowerment is a leadership skill. The idea of being able to give power to somebody to make a decision, so they can make a decision, feel comfortable making a decision for their safety within the realm of understanding, well, how they've been trained, understanding information, but then making decisions. Because the idea in a dynamic workplace like a roofing workplace is, as everybody knows who's been in this business long enough, a roof is not a roof is not a roof. You can have a whole array of homes, for example, that are from a tract houses, but it's so interesting how when you get up on a roof, there's always going to be different issues, whether it's deck issues, whatever it is, but the idea that you empower employees to make decisions when they see something is not quite right. The idea of improving communication and how in an organization communication flows throughout, that means not only down but back up into and throughout the organization. So there's a circle in terms of a visual look. It's just not down, it's around. Provides training at all levels. I mentioned that earlier, but the idea that training occurs at all levels is fundamental to this, because we have to understand what we have to do, and this is where management of training becomes paramount. And lastly, the idea that we're actually involving owners, business owners, the people that are hiring us, and that they appreciate the impact of safety and doing it right, and that owners that hire us understand the idea of safety and what it means to a professional job being done. So this idea of safety climate involves all of the parties that are actively involved, and this is what the FCAT entails. So using either FCAT will help assess your company's safety climate. It will help identify action steps to improve your climate. It can connect you into a larger network of safety professionals, and like I said, especially using the FCAT for the larger employees, you can plug into the network there, submit your information, get information back that gives you information what your employees are saying in terms of these questionnaires. And that's an outstanding way to find out. Just tell everybody to fill it out. It's blind, but you will get information. They just identify companies by numbers, and then when you get that information back, you can really see, is what you're saying actually getting through in terms of throughout the organization, in terms of these safety messages. And by virtue of this, if you then compare with what actually happens, you can start understanding the actual endemicness of the culture that's embedded in your organization, and start understanding ways to make changes if that culture is suggesting, if you're seeing rather that culture is creating situations where people make different decisions under stress, for example. So here's another important approach that Rich is going to talk about, and this is the job assessments. Rich?
Thank you, Tom. We're just going to transition the slideshow over to me so I have control of the screen here. Just take a few seconds here. I've got my computer guru guy here, and he is trying to get me over.
Want me to just do it? Okay. Hello, everybody. This is Rich True, and I will be taking over now. We had a little bit of computer difficulty there, so I had to quick run down to Tom's office to take over here. So I did want to invite you all at the end of this presentation. I believe we're going to have some time for some questions and answers, so some Q&A. So feel free to stay on, and if you'd like, you can type your answers or questions into the chat box there on your screen. So let's get started here with my portion. We're going to talk a little bit about job hazard analysis, or JHAs, and what they are and how you can utilize those for fall prevention on job sites. So in order to understand how we can use JHAs, we have to understand a little bit about some of the things that OSHA looks at. And one of the things that OSHA has is what's called the OSHA General Duty Clause, which states that each employer shall furnish to each of his employers employment and a place of employment which are free from recognized hazards that are causing or are likely to cause death or serious physical harm to his employees. So what we truly have to look at here is what exactly are they looking for, and how can we prevent those things from happening? So are there any hazards out there that we may be recognizing prior to a job even beginning? So again, it's really any hazard for which Section 5A, which is the General Duty Clause, violation is issued. It must be reasonably foreseeable. It's something that needs to be there that we should have understood or figured out that was there that could have been a risk to our employees. Most safety things are typically foreseeable. It's something that we can predict. It's something that we've seen in the past, or it's something that we've actually encountered on one of our jobs prior to this. And I'm going to delve into that a little bit. But one of the first things we have to do prior to even performing a job hazard analysis, or JHA, is we have to go and do a preliminary hazard assessment. And what the preliminary hazard assessment is in reality is that first look at the job site. And it can be done in a number of different ways. One of the ways I utilized in the past of performing a preliminary hazard assessment was to actually look at Google Earth, or look at some type of map online where we could look at an overhead view of the facility or the area that we were going to be performing work. And you can gather some information from that. It can include, the types of units that are on the rooftops, possible access points, possible areas where we actually can set up cranes or set up dumpster boxes, or even store our materials and supplies. One of the other nice things that we can do during this preliminary hazard assessment is look for other things that may not necessarily be in the maps per se. What we can start looking for at this is areas of local hospitals, clinics, urgent care units, and other things that we could potentially take our employees to in case of any type of incident or accident on the job site. But as we get more into the preliminary hazard assessment, we can look at someone performing a quick look around the area, looking for power lines, electrical sources, underground lines that may be in, utilities such as propane, natural gas lines, even sewer systems can be one of the things that we can start looking at during this preliminary hazard assessment. Along with that, we can look for standing water and understand that in those areas, the ground may not be structurally sound enough to set up some types of equipment. So these are things that are indicators that we have to potentially look at prior to starting a job and setting up that job. As Tom mentioned earlier, we also have to look at the structural integrity of the building or the rooftop, and maybe other structures around that area to determine where we can set up our job sites. Also, trees, poles, other things within the area, whether it's light poles, whether it's parking lots, these are all things that during that time we should start to look at. Some other things that I always recommended to all of my safety directors were to look for debris, to look for other things that may come prior to the job that aren't necessarily going to be our responsibility, but are things that we should make sure that we mention ahead of time. This can be garbage, trash, can be other things within the areas, or damage to specific portions of buildings or facilities. I can't tell you how many times I ended up paying for asphalt replacement or cracked sidewalks, even though the cracks and the damage to the areas were done prior to actually
getting on the job. However, because we didn't take any type of preliminary assessment and didn't have pictures or videotapes of those incidents, we ended up paying for them. I'm sure everybody's pretty familiar with that as well. The last area that we need to look at in this is the preliminary hazard assessment would be people and pets, or just the general public in essence. And along with this, not only should we be looking for the general public, but we should also be looking for facility tenants. Whether we're working at a factory where we have to look out for the workers coming out on breaks, or exiting during certain times of days, or exiting during work shift changes, these are things that we need to understand prior to. In my day as a safety director, one of the things that we always tried to do during the preliminary hazard assessment was include the building owner or the tenants so that they could give their employees or their workers or people in the general area kind of indicators of what's going to happen when the job actually starts. So now that we've finished the preliminary hazard assessment and we move on to the next phase, we start to look more in depth at what an actual JHA is, and that is a job hazard analysis. Typically, during the job hazard analysis, there are 4 separate parts, and this is a basic type of job hazard analysis. Your company may have something different that they perform, but this is one that I've utilized for years and have seen the basic 4 here as a true way of actually assessing hazards that are going to possibly occur during the job or that could potentially occur during the job. So if we look over to the left column, we see the first column is work task. And what that involves is what exactly we're going to be doing during the portion of the job that could be just a work condition. This can include something like employee orientation, whether it's on the job or whether it's prior to the job. It can also include things such as stocking roof materials and equipment and other items of that nature. Once we find out what the actual work task is and we understand what those work tasks involve, we can move on to the next phase, and that is to determine what possible hazards could come from that work task. In the case of stocking roofing materials and equipment, a couple things could occur, and actually in many cases could be more than just one. In this case, I wrote down 2 on this page just to show you a few of what could happen. One of the hazards that I noted at any time stocking roofing materials and equipment is to have unsafe equipment. You know, whether it's a piece of equipment that has sharp edges, whether it's a piece of equipment that maybe has an electrical resource or it's a gas-filled or gas-operated unit, those are all hazards that we need to take into consideration once a job starts. Secondly, one of the other hazards that I noticed while stocking roofing materials and equipment was falling materials and the possibility of having head and body injuries. Anytime we're stocking materials and loading materials overhead, we have the potential for, once again, as Tom mentioned earlier, to have falling objects fall onto those people below or to strike individuals below. So now that we've determined the work task and we've determined what the hazard involved with that work task may be, we can then move on to the next phase, which is to determine what those hazard controls can be to either eliminate or lessen what the hazard is. And as you see in the third column, we have hazard control measures and safe work practices that can be done. In the case of unsafe equipment, one of the things that we could write for this is prior to the equipment going onto the job, or once it even arrives at the job and has been unloaded, we can inspect the equipment for proper guards, work lines or cables, cracked or broken parts, or excessive wear. You know, there's a few other things that we could look at in this, but I'm going to go through some of the basics. Once we've determined what the actual hazard controls could possibly be, we have to understand whether or not it's going to actually work. In some cases, let's say, for example, unsafe equipment, we found that one of the pieces of equipment has a damaged part that was damaged during transportation, and that piece of equipment needs to be there that day. In many cases, roofers are go, 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 and they always want to get things done that day. However, when we have a damaged piece of equipment that could cause risk, we need to actually take a step back and understand what could actually potentially happen, hence the name hazard assessment, and then actually try to correct that, trying to control those things. So one of the things that we look at is trying to take that piece of equipment out of service and try to utilize it or fix it or repair it right on the job. If we can't do that, if we can't fix the piece of equipment, if we can't take the hazard out of place at that point, we need to move on from there. And that's the fourth column, and that is a contingency plan. What if all other things fail? What if we can't fix that piece of equipment, or it can't be taken out of service for that? In this situation, we need to look at the contingency plan, which could be to tag and lock that piece of equipment out and remove it from the job site immediately, and then have someone back at the shop actually take a look at it, or have someone maintain it at an off-site location. So now that we know what a JHA is, and we understand kind of the four specific parts of that JHA, we need to understand first who needs to perform it. Now, I had the luxury of having safety directors at most of the locations at my facilities, so it was very easy to appoint a safety director to the task. But many of us may not have a safety director, or may utilize others in place of safety directors on job sites. So what we need to do is first determine who should be there during the performance of the job hazard analysis. And I'll tell you this, one of the things I've always stressed is that our first line of defense while going to a job site is typically the salesperson. Yeah, I said it, the salesperson. It's the person who first visits the job site and measures the entire roof and knows the ins and outs of the facility and the building. So they could be a person that could perform the JHA. But here's the catch. Do they have the training and the necessary know-how to understand what potential hazards could be on that job site? If they do, go ahead and let them perform a JHA. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they have to perform it alone. There can be others that could accompany the person while performing the JHA. As a matter of fact, I'd always suggest that we have a facility maintenance person or facility contractor that actually knows the facility, knows the building, and knows the area around to attend while performing the job hazard analysis. That way you can kind of get in and out of buildings in those locked rooms, up on the rooftop, around the areas that he or she may potentially know. Other people that could potentially perform the JHA are foremen. As Tom mentioned, probably one of the best lines of defense, or probably one of the best people to deal with handling these types of situations, because they're not only in talks with the employees on the rooftop, but also management back at the shop. Operations managers, field supervisors, and other people that could potentially handle this are also people that could perform that JHA while on the job. So what exactly is it that they're going to be doing? Well, simply put, it's going to be doing a survey of the job site. And what actually happens during the JHA is we'll take a nice walk around with a video camera or a camera, take pictures of issues that may arise or potential issues that could arise, take notes for job setup or potential job setups to keep the area safe. And what they're going to be doing is going inside and outside of the facility and all around that facility. To just necessarily look at the rooftop isn't going to gain enough information for our contractor to fully understand all the potential hazards that are there. So what we need to do is try to get into those drop spaces, trying to get into those attic spaces, go into the facility as much as we possibly can, get onto the rooftop, and even walk around the outside of the area. On top of it, the JHA should also cover shift changes or potentials for pedestrians in areas around the work area or other general public people in that area. Where do we do it? Well, I know that with modern day conveniences such as Google Earth and other things that we can look up on the website or on the internet, it's tempting to do a JHA from the convenience of our own office or at our desk. However, in order to perform a true JHA, we should be out at the job site. We should be in the warehouses. We should be on the rooftops and around the facility at any chance we can possibly get. When do we perform it? Well, unfortunately, a JHA shouldn't be performed during the job or after the job. It needs to be done before the job. We're trying to determine what potential hazards are going to be associated with the job ahead of time so that we can move those hazards out of place and conveniently work throughout the job. Now, that's not to say that during the job we can't go back to the JHA, refer back to it, and possibly make some changes and make some conditions a little bit safer. But typically, performing the JHA is done prior to the job. And that's once again why I always said that having a safety director or having a salesperson, that first person on the job while figuring the job, is so important. And then lastly, why do we perform the JHA? Well, once again, we're trying to assess the situation on the rooftop to remove the hazards that are potentially there. And again, OSHA's general duty clause states that we need to supply our employees with a workplace free of recognizable hazards. Why better to do that? What better reason than to actually provide our workers with a safe workplace by providing them with a potential hazard analysis of a job site and trying to remove those hazards from the job site prior to them getting out there. Now, a lot of people ask, okay, I'm done with the job. I can toss the JHA. But in fact, one of the best things that we can do as employers is actually do a post-job review. Who attends that post-job review? Well, it can be the safety director, it can be the foreman, and I would always, once again, invite the salesperson. Now you notice today I'm keying in on the salespeople. And one of the reasons is typically this is where most companies tend to get in trouble. It's when we're going out and figuring the job. It's when we're trying to determine how we're going to do the job, what amount of time the job's going to take, and at what cost. And in many cases, safety is left out of that equation. And when it is, we gain the risk of actually trying to rush through jobs. And when that happens, safety can suffer. So in order to have a JHA or a post-job meeting, we should potentially have those salespeople, the safety people, the foreman, possibly some of the employees that were on the job, and even upper management within the company. Reason being is we can avoid these problems down the road and avoid having any potential problems come some other jobs that may be similar. So we've covered a lot of information today, and hopefully you have some questions that may arise today. If so, you can write those in the column here in the questions and answers section. But remember, we're trying to work this week as safely as possible, and we're helping to join in on the National Safety Stand Down to prevent falls in construction. It's all this week, and if you'd like to look for more information, you can go to www.osha.gov, #StopFallsStandDown hashtag, and look for more information on what you can do to further carry on this week. Some other resources that are here are going to be today, of course, we had the webinar. Tomorrow we're holding NRCA's half-day fall prevention class here at our Rosemont office. During that class, we'll be having a number of different things, discussing rescue techniques and discussing different fall scenarios that have occurred within the roofing industry. Also, NRCA is asking all members, and even those non-members, to share your pictures and stories with NRCA so we can post them on our website. Again, NRCA is here to benefit the OSHA stand down this week, along with OSHA, and loves the fact that we're partnering with them. As an employer, you can go to OSHA's webpage for a certificate of participation for today's webinar. Brad, do we have any questions?
We don't have any questions at this time. Could you go back one slide, Rich, please?
Hold on, what's that?
Could you just go back one slide, please?
Right here?
Yep,
Sure.
You got it. If you are interested in attending that half-day seminar that Rich mentioned, which is tomorrow here in Rosemont, it is a free seminar, and you can go to that website there in front of you that Rich cited, the nrca.net safety stand down website. Gentlemen, it does not appear we have any questions from the audience, so I think we will wrap things up for today. So thanks to both of you guys for your time, and we thank all of the many of you who took time out of your days and leaving your job sites to join us for this important webinar. Thanks, everyone.